Okay, it's the end of the session, and this is Lucy's roadmap to success. Now, Lucy is reactive to other dogs when she is around her guardians, but when the guardians are not there, like when she's at doggy daycare, she can run around with the other dogs, no problem. Other people can walk her and another dog, no problem. She's with her guardians, she's reactive. This tells me that this is related to the leader-follower dynamic established in the house. Now, being a rescue dog, a lot of us, when we get rescue dogs, we let the dog kind of have access to everything all at once. We want to give it a lot of love and attention. That's a wonderful thing we need to do. But eventually we need to transition. Just like humans, if a dog is given everything at once whenever it wants it, after a while it's natural for it to become a little bit petulant and kind of expect that it's going to get whatever it wants, whenever it wants. And so now the other problem that we run into, and this is I think the primary problem with Lucy, is that I think that her guardians trying to be really loving and accommodating for her has confused her into thinking that she needs to be protective or possessive of her humans. Now, we started off the session by talking about exercise. She's a very high energy dog, so I suggested some creative ways that the guardians can exercise her, and that's going to be really important. Exercise alone is not going to fix the problem, but it will make fixing the problem easier, and it can also help her in different situations. For example, if we're going to have somebody come over the house with a young child that she's also has problems with, well, we might want to arrange to have her go out for some dog skiing or playing fetch, or some scent games, or find some stairs and have her rubbing up and down the stairs, or whatever it is, the creative ways I went over off camera. So this way, we give her at least 15 minutes to recover before the child comes in. So we take off that top level of energy. That's gonna make it easier for her to relax and be open to things. Just like us, if we're overly tired, we're cranky. And if we've got too much energy, then we're not going to probably be as accommodating or patient as we would be if we're in a nice and calm and balanced state of mind. Most people confuse excited for happy when it comes to dogs. We come home, the dog is all excited, it jumps up on us, we pet him. Well, anything our dog is doing when we pet it is we're specifically amplifying or rewarding. So if a dog jumps up on me because it's excited, first of all, it's behaving in kind of a quasi out of control manner. It jumps up on me and I'm petting it. What I'm telling the dog is jumping up on me is the best way to get me to pet you. And that will continue happening. If it happens enough, the dog just jumps up on people as its way of saying, I'd like to ask for attention. The problem with that is when a dog jumps up on someone, especially when they arrive, that can be a way of claiming them as their property or letting them know, hey, I'm in charge around here. Now, that's not the case here with Lucy, but if we pet a dog that's fearful, we'll make it more fearful. We pet a dog that's being more aggressive, we'll make it more aggressive. Now, on the same note, if a dog is growling and we correct it or chastise it or anything along those lines, the dog eventually will say, oh, you don't want me to give a warning? Okay, I'll just go straight to a bite. And we definitely don't want to do that. So remember, if your dog is growling, it's baring its lips, it's doing those indicators, it's saying, I don't feel comfortable with this distance between me and whatever I'm reacting to. I'm acting aggressive to try to make that thing move away. And so now the other option of that is I can move away, and that also increases the distance. So we want to make sure that we're watching out. So if we're walking the dog and there's another dog approaching, the guardians need to be kind of mindful of taking a look at Lucy and seeing what Lucy's doing. Is Lucy kind of pulling back? Is she getting stiff? Is she breathing really heavy or holding her breath? Is she staring at the other dog either directly or avoiding looking at the other dog? Those are both warnings. Is she baring her teeth or licking her lips or yawning or turning her head to the side? These can all be indications I don't want you to get any closer. Is she raising her tail or her hackles up? So all these things can be indicators. So one of the things I recommend the guardians do is go for a walk, have one of the guardians behind shooting kind of at this angle. So you want to be able to be low so you can capture Lucy in the shot, but also see the dog in the foreground. And what we do is as we get closer, we start seeing Lucy getting more and more stiff and staring or whatever the things that she does, what her indicators are. Later on, we can watch that video on our big screen TV and say, oh, you know what? Her hackles went up and she bared her lips and she was staring. I didn't see those staring because I couldn't see from this vantage point. So it helps you see those things and play it back in slow motion later on. Once you know what your dog's warning signs are, then you can get the dog out of trouble before they feel like they need to do it themselves. And that's typically what happens for a lot of dogs. Now, I think that in Lucy's case, like I mentioned earlier, I think she thinks she's possessive or protective of humans. So what we need to do is make sure that she understands that she is not in charge. And we don't do that by dominating the dog. We do that by basically acting like leaders in a number of specific ways. For dogs, the higher they sit, the more rank or status they have. So I actually achieve this, I guess just back up a little bit, by enforcing rules as one of the ways I flip what I call the leader-follower dynamic. So if the dog sees us acting like a leader by enforcing a rule consistently, dispassionately, but consistently, after a while the dog's like, oh, she's in charge of this. I don't have to worry about that. Oh, she's in charge of people coming over. I don't have to worry about that. But right now, I think Lucy is saying, I don't trust that little child that has a little drunk walk, because little kids, at that age have that weird walk. And the dog, and also kids have unbalanced behavior, and dogs sometimes are reactive to that. So what Lucy's saying is, I don't like that child there. And my humans, since they don't have any rules for me, they're just too lackadaisical. They're too open-minded about stuff. And some other dog, this is LA, some other dog might come over and take advantage of them. So what we want to do instead is we want to kind of shrink the dog's world by saying, you don't have to worry about that because I got that under control. You don't have to worry about this because I got this under control. I'm going to be the one answering the door. And so we went over a number of rules, and I like to use rules as a great way to flip the leader-follower dynamic, because the dog starts to see the humans acting like leader. Even though the dog might want to jump on the couch or whatever it is, every time the humans block that and correct that behavior, the dog says, oh, they acted like a leader again. Now, one of the problems I think the guardians are going to have in this case is follow-through. If you do not follow through, if you let your dog outlast you, every time you do that, you're telling the dog, if you keep on pushing, eventually I will surrender and you'll get your way. Dogs are very determined. And so if you do that enough, the dog will just keep on pushing, pushing, pushing. And then eventually it's not going to listen to us. So a lot of times what I like to do is achieve a tipping point. So one of the things I talked to the guardians about was leashing the dog. And this is a good illustration of this. So if the leash is over there on the far side of the room, and I get up and I walk over to the leash and the dog runs in front of me, well, that's taking the leadership role. And if the dog gets all excited and I continue the leashing process, I'm rewarding the dog for this unbalanced behavior. So instead what I do is I like to break an activity down in individual steps, help and make the easiest version of that activity possible. Then what I like to do is help the dog practice step one over and over and over again. Actually, instead of the leash, we can go over this with the door, because I did demonstrate this. So somebody came to the door. If I go and answer the door with the dog in front of me, it's in that leadership position. So the first thing I do is use the escalating consequences I went over off camera, specifically the third one, to get between the dog and the door and march towards the dog to make the dog walk back beyond a boundary. In this case, there was kind of some carpet near the front door. So I would say the dog needs to be on that carpet. Now, if I want to teach the dog to do that, I want to teach them in the easiest capacity possible. Now, the first thing I want to do is teach the dog where I want it to go. So I would do that by assigning a command word. So touch the dog's nose with a treat, or just as long as the dog's looking, toss the treat on the carpet that's on the edge of the carpet that's kind of near the door. When the dog goes there, I think the word we were using was reservations, as if you're waiting in line for a restaurant. So when the dog looks it up, say reservation. So you do this without anybody coming through the door. So we take away that energy and that excitement, and we just help the dog practice one step, again, going to this place. And so we keep on tossing the treat there, and then we do that about 10 times in a row. And then when the dog, and then we go away and do something else, and then come back and do it again later on. You want to keep on doing it and say the name of the treat or the command after she licks up each treat. And you should do that for any treat for the rest of your dog's life, for any training. So you keep on doing that until eventually I turn away. If the dog's here, I turn away and I say reservations, and the dog runs over and sits down there. Now the dog understands what I want. And the second step is I would actually go to the door without somebody being there. Now, we did this tonight with somebody there, which makes it a little bit harder, but again, easiest version possible. So I go to the door, and I click the deadbolt over and over with the key. And that sound is going to cause Lucy to get up and start marching towards me. As soon as she gets up, I stop what I'm doing with the door, I turn to face her, and I march her back to the area, or I can command her first, reservations. If she doesn't, then I march towards her with that third consequence. Once she's there, I take a step backwards, and I pause, facing her. Take another step backwards, and I pause. Then I go back to the door and I click the deadbolt over and over again until she stays in place. The next step is I jiggle the handle, and I keep on doing that until she stays in place. And anytime she gets up, I stop and I move her back, and then we repeat the process. Eventually, I open the door a crack, and when I did that, she got up, and I closed it, and we repeated. Then I open a crack, and I keep on doing that until she stays put. Then I open an inch, then 2 inches, 3 inches. Eventually, I will open it all the way up. Then we have a baby gate and then a screen door. So then I would practice with those things too, making it as loud as possible. So one of the tips for this is to actually have you guys practice this when you come home. Instead of going through the garage or the back route, park on the street, come to the door and ring the doorbell like you're a guest. And that way she doesn't know that it's actually one of the guardians. She just thinks it's another invader. And so she gets excited and rushes the door. It gives us a chance to practice this without the pressure of thinking it's an actual person at the door. So we keep on practicing this over and over again until we can go through the whole process with our significant other and the dog stays in place. Then what we do is we do it when we have guests come over, and just have a sign on the door. Please text us before you ring or tell our guests ahead of time. Text us when you're parking, so we're ready. We're not preoccupied with other things. And the more you practice this, eventually somebody comes to the door and she'll just go away because you've practiced and repped it enough. Now I showed the guardians the next step, which would be actually to use counter conditioning to create a command word when she hears the sound of the doorbell to move away from the door. And now before we do that, remember, we want to make sure the guardians, I want them to create a command word to do a certain activity. And she does a certain thing. I'm not going to say specifically what it is because we want to keep this a little bit kind of private. But basically, when the doorbell rings, there's a certain thing that she does. So we want to train her to do that. So what we do, independent of somebody coming through, we're going to trigger that sound. When she reacts the way that we want, we're going to assign the command word, the P command word that we came up with. And we're going to keep on doing that until we can say the P command word and she just demonstrates the behavior that we want. At that point, then we can actually use the counter conditioning approach that I used to stop her from doing that activity. So what we did was every time that we would, I could do a couple ways. I could actually use counter conditioning, squish the treat and let her chew on it, and then trigger the stimulus that causes her normally to do this behavior. But instead of doing it, she's chewing on the treat. And she'll keep doing this until she no longer reacts at all, just continues chewing on the treat. Now, the next thing we can do is also kind of similar to moving the dog over to the carpet by the door, is throwing it far corner of that room away from the door. And remember, when she's about a second away from licking it up, press the button that's going to trigger that sound. So the second that the treat goes in her mouth, she hears that sound. But instead of running towards the door, she's running away from the door. And we keep on doing that until we trigger that sound and she runs away from the door. And so now we're teaching her to move away from whatever that she's reacting to instead of towards. So if this isn't the only activity, there were probably other things that she does. And so again, use that breaking it down in the easiest version possible. Help the dog practice that version, each step of that version in the easiest capacity possible. Then string all the steps together in an easy version. Then make it progressively more and more realistic until you get back to the real world situation. She knows how to behave. Let's see. We also talked about some of the rules we went over, not being allowed on the furniture for 30 days or as long as the problem's still going on. And remember, her job is to push your boundaries, and your job is to say, nope, not allowed, dispassionately, over and over and over again. Now, when she gets, if she does, you can throw a treat on the ground the first time, but I recommend getting those X mats and putting those on the couch because that'll help block her from doing it so you don't have to manage it yourself quite so much. Just fold them up, put them under the couch, and when you get up, take it out, fold it, and go to the bathroom and come back, and that way kind of placeholder. Eventually, when she gets out of a habit of doing it, she'll stop doing it. And I showed the guardians how to create a command word to go to the dog bed. Come up with a command word for each dog bed. The guardians right now are using a very creative command word, which I like, kind of humorous, but they use it for every dog bed no matter what. We want to just say, this dog bed is maybe red, this dog bed command word is blue, and this one is green in this room. So we can actually direct the dog to different locations. Now, some of the other rules: not being allowed on the carpet when the humans are eating food in the living room. Not being within 7 feet of the dinner table if they're eating dinner there. Not being allowed in the kitchen when we're preparing food. The dog has to sit before I open a door. Go to the door, tell the dog to sit once. If she doesn't sit, walk away, sit down somewhere, wait 1 minute, then go back to the door and command her to sit again. If she doesn't sit this time, walk away for 2 minutes. Next time for 4 minutes, then for 8 minutes. Keep on doubling the length of time until eventually she does what you want. Or when you go to the door and say sit, she sits. At that point, then we open the door. And I would do this mostly for going out to the back door because the front door kind of can be related with people coming in, and also, I guess you have a screen door, you can do it there as well. But really, sitting is a more subordinate position. So it helps the dog practice being in that more subordinate position, can really be beneficial. At the same time, we can also help the dog practice listening to us. So let me see. So other rules that we went over. The humans need to eat something before they feed the dog. Now, it doesn't have to be a meal, but they will know if you are faking it. There have been studies about this. Dogs knows, they can smell it. So, and all it has to be 5 tiny bites of a little piece of chip or celery or something like that. So do that. Actually, what I would do is go put the food in the bowl. Make her leave the room first. Then go put food in the bowl while she's out of the room. Then get a chip or whatever you're going to eat and lean against the counter away so you're not blocking her. And you eat it first because dogs eat in the order of their rank. When you get done, then you go over, invite her over to eat, and come up with a fun command word. Use that passive training. So let's say every time she takes her first bite of food, we say the word pasta. Well, every time for 2 months she hears the word pasta, she's taking that first bite of food. Later on, when she's waiting way over here and the food is way over there, we could be sitting on the couch watching TV, and every once in a while just go, sushi, and she gets up and runs over and eats her food. So it's just a creative way to come up with that command word. And again, using fun command words really help anytime you have a dog with aggression problems, because you get a little stiff when your dog's in that situation. Your dog reads that you're being stiff, and that can actually provoke the response. So let me see, we also talked about adding structure to different things like petting with a purpose and passive training. Petting with a purpose is directing the dog to do an activity if it's initiating contact and wants me to pet it or give it attention. So I'm going to say, if you want me to pet you, you have to sit. If you're already sitting, you have to lay down or do something else. And when I pet under the chin, say the word sit and only the word sit. Try to avoid adjectives, not good sit or good girl, good boy. Dogs typically key out the first word that you say. So you want to say just the command word and nothing else. Also make a list of the official command words and say just that command word. We often assign different command expressions for a command action. So come here, come here, over here, here girl, here dog's name, whistle, tap my thigh, dog's nickname. Now the dog has to listen for 10 words out of the 2,000 to 11,000 words each one of us says every day as a human. That's just too hard of a task. Just easier for us to only use one word, come or here or whatever it is. So come up with a list of the official command words, tape it on the refrigerator somewhere, and then if somebody's using the wrong word, you say vocabulary. Person goes, oh yeah. Also use the watchword paycheck if you suspect someone's petting without a purpose. That person can't argue. They stop petting. They tell the dog to sit, pet it under its chin, say sit. And then you say, actually I asked her to sit before you came down the stairs. And when you came down the stairs, she stood up and I continued petting her, which is loud. It is. But just don't argue about it. It's just another opportunity to practice doing it the right way. And even if you want to pet the dog, still ask the dog to sit. The more you do this, the more the dog sees you acting like a leader, and sitting is almost like a way of paying homage. And it helps them respect you a little bit more, because I can't tell you what to do anymore. I have to ask. Now, when she starts coming to sit in front of you, she will do that to prepay for attention. When she does that, make sure we do pet her, recognize and say the word sit, so we're rewarding that desired action behavior. Speaking of rewarding desired actions and behaviors, I'd like to use passive training, which is really a form of operant conditioning. And so basically for passive training, what we want to do is every time the dog does something we want, voluntarily, without any influence from us, I guess that's not quite passive operant conditioning, but you have to know, be an expert to know which one of the guardians is. But basically, every time she voluntarily offers you something that you want, you're going to pet her within that 3-second window and mark it by saying the command word. After a while, she'll start offering those behaviors instead of barking or doing other things that you don't want to get your attention, because doing the positive stuff is what gets you to do it. Now, operant conditioning is what I talked about in the video above. Now, the video above is a dog named Scout that I worked with that has a similar problem with other dogs, and I think the same approach will work. I shot a video for the Guardians, but it's not posted here. So that one will help because it shows a little free shaping. Now, free shaping really is operant conditioning, or operant conditioning could be when the dog comes and sits in front of you, it's prepaying for that attention. It's offering you a desired behavior. Or if the dog comes and jumps up on me, that can be operant conditioning. It causes me to disengage. And make sure you do disengage. If you're petting her and she puts her paw on your arm, stop petting her. If you're petting her and she starts barking, stop petting her. So by stopping her, engaging with her or rewarding her when she does things you don't want, after enough repetitions, she starts to realize, I bark, they stop petting me. So I like the petting, so I just won't bark. There's a word for this. We call it manding, or learning to mand, and this is where the dog can influence my behavior based on what it does. So get in the habit of petting with a purpose of pet training. Those are things that will really, really help the dog. And also look for opportunities to help her practice. Remember, you have to be far enough away from whatever the stimulus is for her to be able to sit and take the treat. So you want to get as close as you can where she's able to sit and take the treat. That's when we start doing the technique that's in the above video, where we teach the dog to look away. Now, also, I'd like the Guardians to work on focus exercise. She has cortisol in her blood, and pretty obvious, because she's jumpy, she's twitchy, and those are signs of that's what happens when you have cortisol, the stress hormone in your blood. Now, your body can't produce oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine at the same time it produces cortisol. Cortisol goes in your blood. The other three, which are go into your brain. can't think of the word for them, but it'll come to me. But basically, when your body is producing oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine, endorphins, see, I told you to come to me, then it has to stop the production of cortisol into your blood. So if you see your dog is stressing out and you can get it away from that situation, and then you get it to do the focus exercise that I showed you, which is done with operant conditioning, the dog learns by looking away and looking at the humans in the eye for longer than 5 seconds. It stops production of cortisol and it starts production of the pleasure endorphins. And so the dog we stop creating the stress, we get creating the relaxing, and we're just kind of hitting it at both ends. Now, I'm hoping that when the guardians kind of shift the leader-follower dynamic, that she starts getting in the fact that where she doesn't react to other children and dogs. But again, you're going to have to properly expose her in a positive way in order for that to happen. For about 75% of my clients, just change the leader-follower dynamic in the house. It takes care of that problem. For some of my clients, though, the dog has a deep-seated issue, and we need to do some follow-up sessions. So if we do need to do that, please let me know. There's nothing wrong with it. Most of my clients only need one session, but some dogs have issues that just take longer, or the humans take a little bit longer. The guardians here have done an amazing job. I mean, they did some things that most of my clients could not do before they saw me. Now, we do work on building up control, so they hopefully can do it after the fact. But actually, one of the things the guardian did was she was throwing treats and then telling the dog to stop on its way to getting the treats, and it did, which is ironically something I did this morning to demonstrate the same technique with my first client. So it's a wonderful way to develop a little bit of self-control and respect for the human's authority figure. Just because I want something doesn't mean I can get it. The last thing is the dog likes to go and launch itself up a wall because there's a neighbor behind that kind of, it's a next level up, and so the dog kind of is looking down. That can be intimidating for Lucy. She looks up and sees that dog way up there, and she doesn't see that dog as being an authority figure, so she runs and launches herself at it. We want to try to prevent her from doing that, and the guardians kind of created a barricade, but she kept on doing it. So there's different things that you can do. Again, teaching her to come to you and move away from that other dog would be a great way to do it. You have to be friends with the other dog. What you'd want to do is just have her over there in the corner without that other dog and give her a command word that means to go away from that corner. And then you say the command word, maybe it's flee. And so she's there and you ask her to come to you. When she comes, you give her the treat and say flee. You're helping her practice moving from that corner back to you, away from the other dog. And again, we practice that without the other dog present. The next stage would be to have your neighbor, the person, the guardian of that dog, bring that dog out, but on a leash. And you would have a long lead on Lucy, like a 30-foot lead. And the idea would be to ask her, have that dog appear just for a second, and then have her move towards you. Now, the problem is, if she gets really close, that dog's gonna have to way over her head. And so you might even start off slower. So you have Lucy with you by the door on the far side of the yard, away from where that dog is, and have Lucy, and do kind of what I talked about in the video above with Scout, is have Lucy look at that other dog, and you give it 2 seconds. If she doesn't look away on her own, then you say a word like attention or ignore. Maybe ignore would be a good one to look away. And so she looks, and then have some really high value train treats. If you're far enough away, you should be able to get her to look at you. And if not, practice having her look at you by saying ignore. Just wait for her to look up there. And when she does, say, Lucy, when she looks at you, click, and then give her the treat. Remember, you're gonna have to reprime that clicker because she's a little bit fearful of it. And you keep on doing that until eventually when she sees the other dog, she just automatically looks at you, and that's when you're gonna give her that multiple treat reward, the jackpot that we talked about. So now other things you can do is walking her with that dog. Could also be beneficial. But in this case, I think she's gonna be in guard mode. So we might have a dog walker come and walk her while the guardian or the neighbor walks their dog. When you're doing that, make sure they're all in a row. Now, the last thing, I got out of the appointment too fast, and the guardians are using a prong collar because it's the only thing that they found. And I was going to give them a martingale collar, but I was way late to the session and ended up, one of the guardians has to get up really, really early, so I got out of there early. It's called a martingale collar. And if I don't have it, I'll have it linked up here, a video on how you can use a martingale collar to stop a dog from pulling on the leash. But martingale long-term, or prong collars, long-term use actually promotes the production of cortisol in the dog's blood. It gives you a little bit more control temporarily, but it also makes the dog agitated. And if the dog pulls because it sees another dog and gets bit in the neck by that collar, because dogs learn through association, it might think that dog bit me or that dog caused the pain in my neck. So now I'm going to get even more aggressive with other dogs. So the Martingale with the special twist of the leash I'm going to show you that I have linked in this write-up. Use that. Get a Martingale. Go to Chewy. They're about $5 to $10. Get one that doesn't have a snap, so it only can slide over her head and off her head. Otherwise, it might break at the wrong possible time. But we want to stop using not the Martingale. We want to stop using the prong collar as quickly as we possibly can. So we're not going to continue to make her more anxious or stressed out. Okay, well, this is Lucy's roadmap to success. Remember, everything you do trains your dog. Only sometimes you mean it.